Hello, I'm Joanne Ferry, and welcome to My Ballot, a KPBS Envision special report. On November 6th, San Diego voters will choose a new mayor. They'll decide on some controversial tax measures which could impact the future of education in our state. And they could change how crimes are punished in California. Over the next hour, we will look at the major issues and candidates on the ballot, starting with the mayor's race. Republican Councilman Carl DeMaio facing Democratic Congressman Bob Filner in what's actually a nonpartisan office. Each candidate has drawn support from both sides of the spectrum. Katie Orr gives us this look at the campaign.
The last week in September was a big one for both of the San Diego mayoral candidates. For Republican City Councilman Carl DeMaio, it was the announcement of a hard-won endorsement from a longtime political foe, fellow Republican Mayor Jerry Sanders.
Only one candidate has demonstrated the detailed knowledge of our city that will be required from his first day on the job. And only one candidate has the focus and the energy that will sustain him through difficult times. That candidate's Carl DeMaio.
Sanders' endorsement was followed a few days later by the announcement that Qualcomm founder Irwin Jacobs, a Democrat, was also supporting DeMaio. The politically charged atmosphere around the mayor's race is unusual for San Diego. Political scientist Carl Luna says that's because San Diego voters are used to two moderate Republicans facing off, not a race between two people from opposite ends of the political spectrum. Luna says the way the power players in the city are lining up reminds him of a popular book-turned movie.
5, 4, 3.
It's kind of like that movie Hunger Games, where you got the city center and the districts. You've got a downtown, more business, pro-Republican element. That group went strongly for Carl DeMaio. The labor unions are all going for Bob Filner. You're finding all the various social groups in town tending to gravitate toward Filner.
And to political observers, the divide isn't surprising. Despite attempts to move to the middle, both candidates are seen as being firmly within the bounds of their political parties. Filner is viewed as a classic Democrat. Luna says he's largely followed the party line while in Washington. At a recent debate, Filner scoffed at DeMaio's suggestion that he turn down his pension if elected.
I work hard for my salary. Every working person deserves a pension. Every working person deserves the security that 30 years of work or whatever has given to that person. So I ain't going to turn it down. I earned that.
DeMaio led the effort to eliminate pensions for most new city employees in San Diego, a cause that's earned him political cred among conservatives. And despite his moderate talk, at that same debate, DeMaio blasted Filner for the support he gets from labor unions and says Filner misrepresents how he'd spend taxpayer dollars.
But they would have gone to your special interest masters, the government employee labor union bosses, to continue unsustainable pension payouts rather than restore the services that are important to our working families.
But politics is all about getting votes, and in general elections, candidates try to appeal to as many people as possible. So for the past few months, Filner and DeMaio have been working to bring out their softer sides and emphasize their ability to unite people. DeMaio made his case at a recent KPBS debate.
My coalition represents Democrats, Republicans, independents from all around our city in all walks of life. We all love San Diego, and that is a tie that unites, and it allows us to overcome disagreements from time to time and party labels.
Filner says he's worked his way up from the local school board to Congress because he can work with people.
You're elected because you're a leader, because you can bring those people together and get things done. That's the hallmark of my career.
Whichever man is elected, he'll have plenty to tackle right out of the gate. City infrastructure, civic projects, and of course, San Diego's financial recovery will all be waiting for the new mayor on day one. And Luna says no matter what their political leanings, each man could face the same challenge.
Both candidates do have a tendency to have, let's say, a profound sense of self and ego. Whether or not they can tame that for the city stage will be important to see.
A recent field poll shows California voters becoming increasingly undecided about Governor Jerry Brown's proposal to increase taxes to fund schools. It's one of two measures on the ballot, both intended to raise money for education. KPBS education reporter Kyla Calvert waded into the details to figure out what each proposition will do, who's supporting them, and why.
Bailing Shaw and Monique Clifford each have children who go to San Diego Unified's Language Academy in the college area. Clifford says years of state budget cuts have left the school in a bind.
We've cut any kind of fat, we've cut muscle, we're cutting limbs. We cannot cut anymore. It's too devastating, it's destabilizing.
Shaw agrees. Her son's 5th grade class has 41 students, but that's not the only problem.
My son's elementary school has no music unless it's paid for by parent fundraising. My son's elementary school has no art unless it's paid for by parent fundraising.
What Clifford and Shaw don't agree on is how to vote on Propositions 30 and 38 on November's ballot. Governor Jerry Brown is behind Proposition 30. That measure would raise sales tax by 1/4 cent for the next 4 years and increase income taxes on Californians earning more than $250,000 a year by between 1% and 3%. Clifford, who's also a teacher at the Language Academy, says supporting Brown's measure is the fairest way to go because it won't cut far into middle-income pocketbooks.
Parents, teachers have already been paying extra because they see what's needed and they've tried to meet those needs. And yet we're going to be willing to pay that extra sales tax.
In addition to being a parent, Shaw is the regional PTA spokeswoman, and California PTAs have gotten behind Proposition 38, which is backed by wealthy activist Molly Munger. The measure would raise income taxes on all but the poorest Californians by between 0.4% and 2.2% for the next 12 years. Those taxes are expected to raise about $10 billion a year. But Shaw says that's just the start of the differences between the two propositions.
The one that means the most to me is the setting up of an independent trust fund that will collect Prop 38 revenue and disperse it directly to schools on a per-child basis.
Some of the money would also go toward paying down state debts and to early childhood education programs. That separate account is key for Shaw because she says state lawmakers have a history of finding ways around California's minimum school funding guarantee.
The voters of California are sick of our schools getting ripped off by funds getting diverted out of the general fund for something else.
Funds from the governor's Proposition 30 would go into a new account that would be part of the state's general fund. In future years, the money would free up other state funds for other programs, not necessarily increase funding for schools. But Clifford says that's part of why she supports the measure.
We can't just think our schools need more money. Our schools need stable communities, and Prop 30 provides the extra support for public safety and health and human services. Our kids are not going to learn if they don't have basic needs met.
If Proposition 30 fails, this year's state budget is set to cut $5.3 billion from the state's public schools and community colleges, $500 million from its universities, and about $100 million total from other state departments and local public safety grants. Many education supporters, including San Diego Unified's Board of Education, are asking voters to vote yes on both measures. If both pass in November, the initiative with the most yes votes would be the one to go into effect. The board's president, John Lee Evans, says every voter who supports both is sending a clear message to legislators.
I think there's really going to be an outcry on the public's part for funding for public education. We rank number 47th in the nation in terms of per pupil funding, and this is just not acceptable. And I think the voters are really going to say, let's stand up and vote for anything that's really going to improve our schools.
But Chris Cate with the San Diego Taxpayers Association says by rejecting both measures, voters would be sending another equally important message.
We already have the second highest income tax rate in the country. We have the highest sales tax rate in the country.
He says if funding education is a state priority, it should be reflected in the budget.
They should focus on that rather than wasting time, energy, and money on things like high-speed rail or other pet projects that they want to get done.
Educators, students, parents, and taxpayers across San Diego County and the state are holding their breath, waiting to hear which message voters choose.
The November ballot includes a life or death decision for California voters. Proposition 34 would repeal the death penalty at a time when executions are declining and capital punishment has been on hold in California. KPBS reporter Tom Fudge says there are still passionate believers on both sides of the issue.
This month, at least a dozen religious leaders gathered at the First Methodist Church in Mission Valley.
California is going to be a beacon on the hill.
The star of the gathering was Sister Helen Prejean, the Louisiana nun and death penalty opponent who wrote Dead Man Walking.
A lot of times we ask the question, who deserves to die? Well, we got to ask the flip question, who deserves to kill them? Do you? Do I? Do we as a society? No, it diminishes life.
The group was religiously diverse, but on the question of the death penalty, they all urged a vote for Prop 34 to repeal the death penalty in California.
Islam is pro-life. Islam is for promoting lives and making the society, the community safer.
I think there are many punishments that can go along with redemption and rehabilitation that do not extinguish the hope that every human being deserves.
The punishment that would replace the death penalty under Prop 34 would be life in prison without the possibility of parole. Among the people who see that as a better way include Ronnie Carmona. In 2008, her son Arthur was killed by a man who ran over him with his car. But Carmona said she never wanted to see the offender put to death. She says the obligation is paid through years in prison.
I felt the person should spend the rest of their life in prison. For me, that's justice. And I know a lot of people talk about, well, the death penalty is closure. There's never any closure when you lose a loved one that way.
Prop 34 is backed by diverse groups of people that include religious leaders and former law enforcement officials. They argue that no justice system is good enough to guarantee that no innocent person would ever be executed. The state legislative analyst says repealing the death penalty would save California up to $100 million every year, mostly in court costs. One reason many victims' families see no closure in the death penalty lies in its history. Since California reinstated the death penalty in 1978, the state has condemned nearly 900 people to death. It has executed only 13. This subject came up at a legislative hearing on Prop 34. There, former L.A. District Attorney Gil Garcetti said the state's inability or unwillingness to actually execute people was good reason to abolish capital punishment.
The system is broken, it's dysfunctional, and underlying this, it cannot be fixed.
But not everyone accepts the argument that the death penalty should be abolished simply because the state has failed to make it work, bogging it down, they argue, with cost, red tape, and appeals. Kermit Alexander's mother and younger sister were both murdered, and he wants the death penalty fixed.
What we need to do is figure out, we have the brains and we have the money, we need to figure out the most expeditious way to get it done and get it done.
Daniel Lamborn agrees. He's Chief Deputy District Attorney for San Diego County. In the 1990s, he prosecuted Cleophas Prince, who was found guilty of sexually assaulting and murdering 6 women. Prince was sentenced to death in 1993, but today, 19 years later, he's still alive in San Quentin. When asked why he still supports the death penalty, Lamborn tells us to imagine someone who commits 1 rape and murder.
Well, here's somebody else who does that not once, not twice, but 6 times, where he terrorizes and essentially tortures and kills and sexually assaults women. Are 5 of those murders free ones, where he doesn't do 1 more day in custody, no more punishment for 5 of those 6 women that were killed? He would have gotten life in prison for the 1. And so we tell him, send the message out to the committee, hey, once you do 1 murder, you might as well do a dozen, because there won't be 1 more day in custody for that.
California death row inmates are much more likely to die of natural causes than execution. They typically stay on death row for more than 20 years. Lamborn says given the political will, California can speed up the appeals process. But in the end, the issue for both sides isn't about cost or delays. It's about doing what's right.
When we have the DNA, when we have soil samples, fiber samples, every aspect of science coming in and saying, this guy did it. And when we have a monster, why not do justice? Why not do justice?
We look at the death of an innocent Jesus on a Roman cross, and we learn 2 things. 1, human beings are incapable of discerning ultimate innocence or guilt. And 2, even in the face of guilt, God calls us to grace. Thank you.
There's another measure dealing with crime and punishment. California's 3 strikes law passed in 1994. Attempts to modify it have failed partly because advocating against a tough-on-crime approach has been political suicide. But KPBS reporter Allison St. John says Proposition 36 would tweak the 3 strikes law at a time when California is being forced to cut the prison population and its budget.
Ursula Thomas was in her early 20s when this picture was taken. That was 18 years ago, before she went to prison for life under California's 3 strikes law. Her mother, her 18-year-old daughter, and her granddaughter have not seen her since. Thomas was sentenced in San Diego. Her 3rd strike was stealing clothes worth $150 from Mervyn's. Her prior strikes were armed burglary, though her mother says she was only armed with a screwdriver. The public defender's office has tried unsuccessfully to have her sentence reduced. Frank Corser is with a group called Families to Amend California's 3 strikes law.
And this is probably the most egregious cases where you find 690 people doing 25 years to life for simple drug possession, 385 for shoplifting, 181 for receiving stolen property. And that's the part that I don't think the voters ever had any intention of targeting those people.
Gary Gibson with California Western School of Law says Proposition 36 is designed to make the punishment better fit the crime.
The initiative takes away the ability for someone to be incarcerated for 25 to life for a, quote, 3rd strike if their new crime is not serious or not violent.
About a quarter of California's prison inmates are now 2nd or 3rd strikers. This is important because California is under a federal court order to reduce the prison population from more than 160,000 to no more than 112,000 prisoners. By transferring less violent criminals to county jails, the prison population is now down to less than 120,000, but that's not low enough. California's ailing budget is another consideration.
With the cost of incarceration being in excess of $50,000 a year now, if you're going to incarcerate somebody for 25 years to life, and that's it, you have to be there at least 25 years. You're looking at, what's that, $1.5 million, $1.25 million for minimum for somebody for one of these sentences.
California's legislative analyst says Prop 36 would save the state between $70 to $90 million a year for the next 2 decades. New fiscal and legal realities are challenging the old political philosophy that anyone who's not tough on crime risks their political career. Los Angeles Police Chief Charlie Beck and LA DA Steve Cooley support Prop 36.
Many law enforcement agencies in San Diego have taken a position against Proposition 36, but they've declined to come out and speak about it publicly.
And in fact, here in San Diego, Bonnie DeMonis has actually personally taken me to the side and said, Frank, I believe this law needs to be tweaked. But it's politically not very comfortable for them to come out and say that publicly. And that, I think, really needs to change.
San Diego District Attorney Bonnie DeMonis would not comment for this story on Prop 36, but her boss, County Supervisor Ron Roberts, is against it.
There are people who belong in prison to the extent that they're getting out before they should be. We don't need another victim. Okay? I don't want to have to visit families or deal with people who are on the streets when they shouldn't be, that you or I or our families or anybody in this community then becomes a victim. That's not the answer.
Mike Reynolds, a Fresno man whose daughter was murdered 20 years ago, is the author of the 3 strikes law. He is fighting to preserve it and says it should be credited with the drop in crime in California in recent years. But Frank Corser disputes that.
Throughout across the nation, there's 25 states that have a 3 strikes, 25 that do not. Those 25 states that don't have a 3 strikes enjoyed the same drop in crime as California did, but without spending a dime.
Rapists, child molesters, 26,000 dangerous criminals will be released from prison.
Prop 36 is not the first time voters have been asked to modify 3 strikes. Prop 66 was defeated in 2004, but Gary Gibson says this proposition is better crafted. Prop 36 would not automatically release those with a nonviolent 3rd strike. They would have to be resentenced, and anyone with a prior conviction of murder, rape, or child molest would not be eligible.
The people in law enforcement have a very valid perspective, which is this law has done a lot of good, and without a doubt it has. And I think the people on the opposition side, or the side of proponents of Prop 36, are saying, yeah, you've done a lot of good, but you've also done some bad. So let's fix the bad and keep the good.
Medical marijuana has been legal in California since 1996, but in San Diego County, many patients are having trouble getting their hands on it. That's because all the storefronts selling it have been effectively shut down. Now, activists in 4 cities have gotten measures on the November ballot to support dispensaries. More from KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg.
Vay Linville has severe emphysema. He needs bottled oxygen to survive. When Linville was first diagnosed, doctors told him without a double lung transplant, he'd soon be dead. Linville got his affairs in order. Then, one day, when he was searching on the internet, he discovered a treatment for breathing problems that used to be widely prescribed in the 1800s. Tincture of cannabis. Linville found a recipe for it and decided to make it himself.
I went out and joined one of the clubs, one of the dispensaries, and was able to buy approximately a quarter pound of concentrates that I put in a small amount of alcohol and consumed over about 10 weeks. And instead of dying as expected, here I am 6 years later, doing better and better.
These days, Linville uses just a few drops of the tincture in his tea. But getting any amount of marijuana is difficult because nearly all local dispensaries have been closed. Linville says that puts him in a tough spot.
It's immoral to make me choose between suffocating and doing business with a drug dealer. This is not a choice that the patient should be faced with. It's wrong.
Linville is with the group Americans for Safe Access. With the help of some local activists, they've placed a measure on the November ballot in Imperial Beach. That's a town where Linville grew up. Prop S would repeal Imperial Beach's ban on medical marijuana dispensaries. It would allow dispensaries to operate under specific zoning and operational requirements. Imperial Beach business owner Marcus Boyd is one of the driving forces behind Prop S. Boyd became an advocate back in 2008 when his sister was dying in a local convalescent home. Boyd says marijuana helped relieve her pain. One night, she asked staff for a joint. She wanted them to call Boyd to get one for her.
They laughed, and a couple hours later, she passed away. When I found that out the next morning by going there, I made a commitment to myself and to her that I would make sure that people in need are able to find medicine when they need it.
Boyd says Prop S adheres to state guidelines and adds 19 other restrictions to protect patients and the community.
They would require lighting both inside and outside, sufficient so that the mandatory surveillance cameras, both inside and outside, would be able to clearly determine who somebody is at 40 feet away. That's more security, I think, than any location in Imperial Beach.
The measure would also restrict operating hours and prohibit dispensaries within 600 feet of a school or playground. Nonetheless, Imperial Beach Mayor Jim Janney and the majority of the city council are against it. Janney's not opposed to medical marijuana per se. He thinks patients should be able to get it. But Janney says the authors of Prop S went overboard.
If it was as simple as say, I want to allow for 3 storefronts in Imperial Beach, they would have said that, but they didn't do that. We could have up to 19 or 20 of them or more, depending on how you locate them. I think that's way too far, and I don't think that that was good law. I don't think that's really the way it should work.
Imperial Beach voters won't be the only ones in November to decide whether to allow dispensaries in their town. Voters in Solana Beach, Del Mar, and Lemon Grove will also weigh in.
But even if these measures pass, there are no guarantees that any medical marijuana dispensaries will be allowed to operate.
That's because U.S. Attorney Laura Duffy has been aggressive in enforcing the federal ban on marijuana. Working with the DEA and local law enforcement, she's led the way in forcing local dispensaries to shut down. Duffy has gone even further. In July, she sent a letter to the city attorney in Del Mar. The letter said city employees who conducted activities mandated by their dispensary ordinance would not be immune from federal prosecution. Duffy wouldn't agree to be interviewed for this story. Despite the Fed's position, Vay Linville says there are tens of thousands of sick people in San Diego County who could benefit from medical marijuana.
People with AIDS, people with cancer that really are entitled to safe access to this medicine as they would be to any other.
This election has some familiar faces running for office in new districts. The political lines were redrawn after the last census. It's created a hot contest in the 52nd Congressional District. Evening Edition host Peggy Pico spoke with both candidates one-on-one. First up, Congressman Brian Bilbray.
Because our congressional districts have new boundaries this year, the 52nd district is now more evenly divided between Democrat, Republican, and independent voters, making the outcome of this year's election unpredictable. Joining me to talk about his campaign is Republican candidate Congressman Brian Bilbray, who currently represents the 50th district. Congressman Bilbray, welcome.
Great to be with you, Peg.
A good portion of San Diego voters are military, and there's been some criticism in articles about your voting record when it comes to veteran benefits, that you voted for limiting veteran benefits or reducing them.
Peggy, I come from a military family. I was born and raised, born on a military, in a military hospital. My father died at Balboa. I was the member who, with Bob Filner, got a 2-year budget cycle for the veterans. And, you know, these kind of attacks are what happens come election time. I mean, I actually, with Bob, had the largest increase of benefits, funding for the Veterans Department while I was on that committee.
Were those votes then something else?
Those votes are the political action of saying, let's take the president's budget and let's add massive tax increases and double spending on something that the administration, that President Obama's people said that we couldn't even, we've got our budget, we've got plenty of money, and this is a political tactic. This is why people are so cynical about what goes on in Washington, and that's why they believe so little of these things when they come out like this.
Let's bring it back to San Diego.
Let me say one thing. Before we talk about veterans, I'm proud that I carry in my back pocket a lifetime honorary membership to the Fleet Reserve Association, a naval veterans organization. Not too many members of Congress can say that, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Let's bring it back to San Diego. I was saying many of your television ads talk about the economy and jobs in San Diego. Let's take a look at one of those ads and what you're explaining there.
Our first priority should be making sure that every San Diegan seeking employment can find a job. How? Well, we can start by getting rid of unfair regulations that make it not only hard, but practically impossible to start a business or hire employees.
What unfair regulations are you specifically talking about in San Diego?
Well, let me tell you, as a former environmental regulator in one form or the other, I can tell you one would be the restrictions on construction of the Jonas Salk School. Been held up for a year by federal regulators. It's a graded pad. It should have been able to go through. We have scientists working on green fuel technology that have state and federal programs blocking them from moving forward with a lot of production. Those are the kind of things that I think the American people, and San Diegans especially who want jobs, want us to change the regulations so it's legal for these small businesses doing great things to actually hire more people.
You have worked a lot in this campaign to show voters that you are a moderate candidate, but according to Washington Post voting tracker, you voted with the Republican majority 90% of the time. Are there any issues that you wouldn't vote along party lines with?
Oh, well, I think you just saw that I voted against their bill on coal. I think that the concept of trying to subsidize what's called clean coal is logical as safe cigarettes. But no, my voting record has been rated from 1 to 100 as being liberal to conservative. I sit at 54. Bob Filner sits down very liberal. People like Darrell Issa ends up at about a 74. But those are votes without procedural self. It's much like that vote that you were talking about where they said, oh, you voted against veterans. Those are political votes that are purposely set out there. It's the kind of waste of time that we need to get away from in Washington. But if you see the journals and the way they've rated, I didn't decide to vote that way, but over my time in Congress, I've had a 54, not too much more moderate than right at that close to 50, which is the most moderate you can be.
All right. Very quickly, we have less than a minute. You signed the Norquist Pledge to never raise taxes while you're in Congress. How are you going to be able to keep that promise?
Well, easy, because we have $4 trillion worth of taxes coming down the road now. We've just had a major tax increase done a few years ago on middle-class people. And the fact is, this is one place where not even the president is talking about adding any more taxes on. We're talking just basically about who is going to get hit with the taxes that are on there and who are we going to keep off of it. And so the real issue here is not about talking about raising taxes. It's about how do we reduce the increase, the massive increase, the largest increase that we have seen in this century will kick in the next few months if we don't get together and work this out. And that's why it means somebody like myself that's worked with Democrats and Republicans, found a common ground to work it out. We need to work together, and that's the key in the next few years.
All right, we are out of time. Congressman Brian Bilbray, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much. Honor, Peggy.
Bilbray is being challenged by Democrat Scott Peters, who also spoke with Peggy on KPBS Evening Edition.
Joining me to talk about his campaign for the 52nd congressional seat is former San Diego City Council President and current Port Commissioner, Democrat Scott Peters. Welcome to Evening Edition.
Thanks, Peggy.
Your opponent talks about in his ads your vote to underfund the city's pension plan while you were on the city council. He calls it fiscally irresponsible and says the same of you. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, I think you have to look at the whole record. The city of San Diego had 3 decades of bad pension practices, and unfortunately, it was a mistake for me to vote early in my career to continue those. But then we realized we had a problem, and we did something about it. We hired outside experts to tell us what went wrong and how to fix it. We made pension underfunding illegal. We made our employees pay a larger cost to share their benefits. We held the line on raises. We negotiated a new pension system that would save about $23 million a year. At the end of our long decade, the SEC itself said that San Diego was a model for other cities to follow. And I'd contrast that to Washington, D.C., where Congress has had a number of years of bad habits. We still have more work to do in San Diego, but they haven't even started. And that's the point I make, is we have some lessons to teach Washington about recognizing our problems and getting started on fixing them.
Some lessons you've learned personally?
I think so. Well, I mean, some lessons I've learned is that well, you know, one of the things we did was we established an independent budget analyst position for the city council, so it would have its own financial professional advice. We didn't have that. We only could listen to management. That's all the advice we had. So checks and balances is one way. Don't believe the first thing you hear is the only thing that you can hear. And I think that lesson has served me well in the city.
In one of your TV ads, you talk about balancing the budget the right way. Let's take a look.
Okay.
We need to balance the budget the right way. Protect and strengthen Medicare and Social Security. Seniors have earned it.
Seniors have earned it, Medicare and Social Security. What are some of your specific ideas on how to strengthen and or balance the budget when it comes to Social Security and Medicare?
Well, with respect to Medicare in particular, because there's been a lot of talk about that, I want to cut the costs. My opponent wants to cut the benefit. He's voted for the Ryan budget, which the Wall Street Journal said would end Medicare as we know it. I think we can save it. So specifically, we should begin negotiating down the cost of prescription drugs, which a private health care plan would do, which we don't do. We should be making sure we're getting rid of fraud and overbilling. We should be taking advantage of new technologies like electronic record keeping and wireless medicine to lower the cost. Ultimately, we have to transition our health care system from a sick care system, which rewards visits and procedures, to a health care system that also rewards prevention. That will really lower the cost of things in the long run.
How would you pay for that?
Well, those are savings. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think that already, you talk to hospitals, they're starting to think about how to redo their health care so that they're serving pools of people, providing better outcomes, and judging themselves more by outcomes than just by the number of procedures and number of visits.
You were part of a KPBS investigative report because of an email correspondence between you and UT San Diego CEO John Lynch. He asked you how you were going to vote on extending the Dole lease on the port. You said you didn't tell him how to vote in your email, but later on it said that you could rescind your vote. You responded back to him. Why did you say that to him, and what does that tell voters?
Well, that's not quite right. The question he raised, he said he wants to build a stadium on the 10th Ave Marine Terminal. He said, is there a way to get out of this lease if we decide that's the way to go? And what I told him was that there was a termination provision in the lease, and that I thought the lease was a good idea. Now, I went to the big story here is that you had someone who's either a newspaper person or a real estate developer, and the line is fuzzy, threatening a sitting port commissioner in the context of politics, because he said it would be an issue in the campaign, and also said he would disband the port if we voted the wrong way. I did not fold to that pressure. I voted what I thought was the best thing as a trustee for the Tidelands. I think that Dole lease is a good lease for jobs, and we extended it. And I'll stand up for people who work on the waterfront and for our military, which also uses that facility as a strategic port to supply the Middle East.
All right. The boundaries for the 52nd District are nearly evenly split between both parties, and there's a lot of independent voters as well. How would you represent them in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I was the first Democrat to represent my city council district, which was La Jolla, University City, Carmel Valley, and Rancho Penasquitos. Those people are not necessarily, they're not particularly liberal. They're sort of like the district. They're, you know, a third Republican, a third Democrat, a third independent. They want to see things work. And whether it's, you know, fixing up a ballpark district or finishing Highway 56 or cleaning up beaches and bays or expanding the convention center, I bring a record of working across the aisle to get things done. Other people say it, but I've actually done it. And that's why I've gotten support from not just Democrats, but also independents like Nathan Fletcher, or Republicans like 4 former Chamber of Commerce chairs and Mr. Malin Burnham, because they want to see things work and they think I'm the better candidate for that.
All right, we are out of time. San Diego Port Commissioner Scott Peters, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you, Peggy.
Proposition 33 would let voters tweak the state's car insurance rules, rewarding those with continuous insurance coverage. Those without would pay more. KPBS Business and Environment reporter Eric Anderson has more.
The idea isn't new. In fact, Proposition 33 is similar to the voter-rejected Proposition 17 on the ballot 2 years ago. Essentially, people who've had car insurance continuously for 5 years can get a discount. People who've had an interruption in coverage would face much higher car insurance fees. Prop 33 adds some exceptions that include military, students, and children living with their parents. It's a message that supporters will put on televisions around the state.
Prop 33 would reduce insurance rates for all drivers by encouraging uninsured drivers to purchase insurance.
Consumers deserve a reward. Vote yes on Prop 33.
Rachel Hooper works for the Yes on 33 campaign. She says current law only allows the consumer's current insurers to offer a loyalty discount. She says Prop 33 makes the market more competitive by making a continuous coverage discount portable.
I have a colleague who has insurance with one carrier. He's had it for 20 years, and he wanted to go to a different carrier because he liked their customer service better. But when he called that new company, they said they couldn't match what he was currently paying. They couldn't match his rate because they can't give him that continuous coverage discount.
Prop 33 is the second try to create a new provision in California's car insurance marketplace. The owner of Mercury Insurance, a self-made billionaire, funded 2010's Prop 17, and he's a major supporter of Prop 33. George Joseph spent nearly $15 million then, and he put up another $8 million this time.
There's no secret that it's the personal funds of George Joseph, but I think he really values competition in the marketplace and sees that if Prop 33 passes, there's more competition. Again, it benefits consumers because with more competition, you have lower rates.
Voters just have to ask themselves one simple question.
Carmen Balber works with Consumer Watch, an advocacy group that's opposing Prop 33.
When is the last time an insurance company executive spent $8 million to save you money on your car insurance? Everyone knows the answer is never.
Her group is working with a fraction of the budget of her opponents. Instead of television spots, their ads are online only.
My name's Kyle. I'm a college student right now. I can't afford a car as of now, but even if I could, my school doesn't allow us to have them on campus.
Balder says she hopes voters see this as a retread of Prop 17. She says the measure isn't about loyalty discounts.
That discount won't change. Prop 33 creates a new one. It will give some people a small discount for having prior insurance and will give people who didn't have prior insurance an increase in their auto insurance rates.
Balber says the measure makes a major change to car insurance protections passed by voters 24 years ago. Proposition 103 was approved 3 years after California made car insurance coverage mandatory. It created consumer protections in a marketplace that required coverage.
Insurance companies can't charge you more just because you don't have current insurance, just because of your history of insurance coverage, because that was a way for the insurance industry to redline out customers that they just didn't want to cover.
UC San Diego Professor Thad Kauser says he's not surprised to see the issue back in front of voters just 2 years after a similar bill failed to get support. That, he says, is how California's direct democracy system works. Money can and does buy ballot access.
Well, what we've seen in the past, whether it's Pacific Gas and Electric's initiative that failed a few years ago, this other Mercury Insurance initiative, is that voters are often skeptical when there's one group behind this process that's supposed to be for us all.
Proposition 37 deals with the food we eat, calling for labels on foods with genetically engineered ingredients. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser gives us a look at the debate.
This might look like an ordinary bag of potato chips, but to people like Jimbo Somek, the owner of Jimbo's Naturally grocery stores, it isn't.
And as you can see on the back, or excuse me, on the front of this bag, there is that non-GMO project verified label.
Somek is a supporter of Proposition 37, the state initiative that would require labels for food made from genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. It would also prevent GMO food from carrying a label that says natural. GMO food is made from plants with DNA that was manipulated in a laboratory. For example, implanting a potato's DNA with a pesticide to make it naturally resistant to bugs. About 70% of grocery store food in the U.S. contains GMO ingredients, according to the Center for Food Safety. And supporters like Somek say consumers have a right to know if their food comes from these GMO crops.
We have a basic right to know what's in our food. We know the nutrients, we know the ingredients. Why don't we have the right to know if something is made from GMOs? And I think it's only right that we have this.
The idea of eating a potato that has pesticide DNA might sound scary, but the FDA and most scientists say GMO food is safe. Stephen Briggs, a biology professor at UC San Diego, studies plant diseases. He says many foods produced from genetically engineered, or GE crops, do not actually contain genetically modified ingredients. Take sugar. He says it's so processed that there's no chemical difference between sugar made from GMO sugar beets and sugar made from organic sugar beets.
We can do atomic level analysis, and sucrose is sucrose. Doesn't matter how you made it. It's a defined chemical. Under Prop 37, exactly the same chemically indistinguishable sugar made from a GE sugar beet would have to be labeled. But sugar from any other non-GE source wouldn't be labeled. So this is totally misleading to indicate that somehow they're different when we know they're exactly the same.
A French study released in September riled both the yes and no campaigns with its finding that rats fed GMO corn develop tumors and liver and kidney problems. But Briggs says most in the scientific community agree the study has multiple problems, including its research methods and statistical analysis.
We all agree it's a very flawed study, and it would not have been published in most journals. I think it's going to be a really interesting story if we ever learn about it, about how this made it through the peer review process.
Even if that study is disproven, the fact that research on GMO food is still evolving feeds into Prop 37 supporters' concerns.
Definitely not been enough testing on it to show that there is no risk at all. And I certainly don't want, let alone me, my kids to be a science experiment.
Because the proposition would set a precedent in the national food industry, donations are piling up from GMO seed makers like Monsanto and Dow. So far, the No campaign has raised $34.5 million, while the Yes side has just over $4 million. The No campaign is running TV commercials arguing the measure contains too many special exemptions, will increase food costs, and hurt small businesses and farmers.
The people that are least able to pay are going to be forced to pay more.
The state's legislative analyst says the measure would cost the state anywhere between a few $1,000s to over $1 million each year to pay for more monitoring of food labels. Biologist Stephen Briggs says GMO labeling will also unnecessarily scare consumers.
The consumer who's out there making their purchasing decisions, they see a warning label, Because our current labels have integrity, they're going to think that warning label also means something, but we know it doesn't. It tells you nothing about the composition of the food.
But even if there is nothing harmful about GMO food, some supporters say there are other reasons to not want to buy it. David Bronner is president of Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps in Escondido. His company has given more than $360,000 to support Prop 37, even though the measure would not impact its business. For Bronner, it's not just about the food. He says genetic engineering is an issue of justice.
It's basically been the chemical industry buying up the seed industry and engineering resistance to their toxic herbicides that are getting dumped more and more on our food. And so this, this is what we need to know. We need to know about this. And, and again, regardless, people who don't agree, fine. Well, be proud of it. Say, hey, it's genetically engineered. You're proud of that. People should know it. So what are you afraid of?
Bronner and Somex say the fight to pass Prop 37 is a grassroots movement, and they hope the little guys will defy the odds and win.
It's the David versus Goliath. It's the people versus the dollars, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays itself out.
Proposition 39 doesn't have a lot of formal opposition. It would raise more than $1 billion in new tax money from out-of-state companies. Much of that money would go toward new green jobs. Businesses originally opposed to the idea have decided not to fight it anymore. Once again, KPBS business and environment reporter Eric Anderson.
The most obvious question for San Francisco hedge fund manager Tom Steyer is why? Why is he bankrolling an initiative dealing with state tax law?
I want to participate like everybody else in seeing California becoming a better place to live.
Steyer has already fought and won a battle at California's ballot box. In 2010, he helped defeat Proposition 23. That measure would have rolled back California's landmark global warming law. Now he's putting $20 million of his own money into passing Proposition 39.
It's about tax fairness. We are closing a loophole, but all we're asking out-of-state companies to do is to pay taxes on their income exactly the way that we do. And what that will do is it will bring into the state of California over $1 billion every single year, and all from companies from out of state.
California voters are getting a chance to do what California lawmakers failed to do in 2009. San Diego State University professor Steve Gill says the legislature gave companies a choice of how to pay their corporate taxes.
For years and years and years, we had a long tradition of using what's called a three-factor apportionment formula, which meant we look at three different factors that are economic drivers of income: sales, property, and payroll.
California lawmakers changed the rules so corporate taxes could be based on sales only. Many California companies adopted the sales-only rule because it was cheaper. But the state didn't get rid of the old tax formula, and some out-of-state companies find that formula cheaper.
Large multi-state companies that don't have a lot of payroll and property in California, but probably have a lot of sales. California is a very large state with a very large population. Clearly, they are disadvantaged by a single sales factor and would prefer to keep the old three-factor formula.
Prop 39 would eliminate the choice and base corporate taxes on sales only. GM, Chrysler, Kimberly-Clark, and International Paper all spoke out against the idea when the measure qualified for the ballot, prompting the Prop 39 camp to take out ads attacking that opposition.
These companies are stepping all over California. They're fighting to keep $1 billion corporate tax loophole that gives tax breaks to companies for shipping jobs out of state.
But those large companies didn't have the stomach for an expensive ballot box fight in California. Co-sponsor Tom Steyer pulled the ad campaign when the companies dropped their opposition.
Some huge major American corporations have sent us letters who we thought might be in opposition and who are prepared to try and, debate. Send us letters saying, you know what? It is tax fairness. We recognize what you're doing is correct. We have no intention of opposing you.
Steyer says that allows him to focus on the positives and fixing two long-running California problems: tax revenue and jobs. He says the measure will generate $1 billion more for a cash-starved state. It earmarks half that money for the creation of green jobs over 5 years. But both of those solutions make Richard Ryder shudder. He's the chair of San Diego Tax Fighters. Ryder says Prop 39 is a tax hike, plain and simple, and he thinks voters will see that.
The last 8 tax increases that have been on the ballot, statewide tax increases, each of which could have passed with a simple majority vote. A lot of people think it takes 2/3. No, simple majority vote. The last 8 tax increases statewide have failed. 6 of the tax increases failed by double digits.
Ryder says a tax hike won't dig the state out of its fiscal hole. He argues that California needs fiscal discipline, not more money. And he's not ready to let politicians steer $500 million a year into green energy projects.
It's not like there's a bunch of wise, pipe-smoking geniuses up there making those distributions. It's going to be people who respond to pressures in Sacramento. It's going to be people who respond to political contributions.
About 300,000 registered voters in the county are not affiliated with the political party. Peggy Pico explains how a new political website will cater to independent voters in San Diego.
Based in San Diego, the Independent Voter Network, or IVN, is an online news source for voters with no party preference or independence. The website quickly became a popular source for national and state political news since it began 10 months ago. Joining me to talk about the site's newest edition, a focus on San Diego politics, is IVN founder Chad Peace and Whitney Benjamin, a no-party preferred voter in San Diego. Thank you both for joining me. Now, San Diego's registrar of voters told me that the no-party preference voters is the fastest growing group of constituents here in San Diego. Chad, is it just that San Diegans are, particularly independent-minded, or is this a trend we're seeing across the nation and in the state?
I think San Diegans are independent-minded, but it's a trend throughout the state and the country. Particularly in the state, we just passed the nonpartisan open primary initiative, which changed our primary process to a nonpartisan process rather than a party-controlled process. I think this will catalyze people maybe registering as independents, but I do want to emphasize that IVN is about independent-minded voters, so that includes all of us, Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, and people that are registered no party preference.
Let's take a look at the breakdown. This is from the California Secretary of State. They reported as of September 43.3% of registered voters in the state are Democratic, 30.1% are Republican, and the no party preference is 21.3%, with 5.3% being other. Now, Whitney, you're one of the no party preferred voters living here in San Diego. Why did you decide to go that route?
I think it started in high school. I had a pretty proactive government teacher and U.S. history teacher, and I kind of became a little bit more passionate about politics and our entire history as a country, and I felt like I couldn't at that time decide that I absolutely was always going to vote Republican or I was always going to absolutely vote Democratic. I felt like I didn't have enough information on the table, and now I'm in a spot where I feel like the parties are so polarized that I can't always vote one way. I think it depends for me by the topic and what's happening. So I happened to make that decision when I was 18, and it still is the right decision for me now.
All right. And Chad, why did you start IVN?
Well, we started IVN because I believe our political discourse, like the political parties, we see the congressional approval ratings around 10%, and everybody talks about the partisanship on both sides of the aisle. We started IVN to provide a platform for communication where we can all start talking to each other instead of past one another. There's no litmus test on IVN. There's 4 simple etiquette guidelines. Don't attack each other, substantiate what you say, don't make partisan-based attacks. If everyone follows these guidelines, we believe we can raise the level of discourse to a place where we can start coming to solutions that aren't based on party.
I want to talk specifics about who's registered in California, the county. So again, from the California Secretary of State, our latest numbers are in the state there are 3.7 million registered voters. In the county, 1.4 million. And in San Diego County, of those 1.4 million, 300,000 are like Whitney. They have no party affiliation. And again, this is a growing number here. Where do you get your political information from, Whitney?
It definitely depends. Like I'm really busy, so I like reading USA Today, and I get a lot of my information from Twitter. Even I used to read the UT every day, but now I don't. I feel like it's a little one-sided, and so you really have to search for news sources that give you a balanced viewpoint in it. So on a daily basis, I'll look at the USA Today, I'll look at Wall Street Journal, I'll watch The Daily Show, and I'm busy and I want a fair choice when it comes to news. So it's good to hear about organizations like that where it feels like both sides are represented.
And IVN is, Chad, so it's tell me about who funds it and why you chose San Diego as your focus group for going a little bit more local.
We'll start with the second question. We chose San Diego because we're based right here in San Diego. We have a small group. 4 of us just graduated from USD Law School, actually this March. I know the dean and some of our professors aren't happy about us not taking the bar yet, but that's why we started here in San Diego. And so we're launching a local prototype here because as you mentioned before, we are a very independent-minded group here.
How are you funded?
We're funded by FIVE, the Foundation for Independent Voter Education, is the publisher of IVN. So they're funded much like PBS through individuals, corporations, unions, but they have no say in the content that goes on the site, and that's how we get our funding, just like PBS.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So, Chad and Whitney, thank you both for talking to me. Now, viewers at home, you can find out more information about the Independent Voter Network on our website, kpbs.org.
You can learn more about all the races on the ballot through the KPBS Voter Guide. It breaks down the big races and all the measures into clear language with links to our stories and candidate bios. You can even take it to the polls on your smartphone. You can find the KPBS Voter Guide on our website at kpbs.org/voterguide. Well, early voting is already underway, or you can cast your ballot at the polls on November 6th. Then on election night, we hope you will join us once again for complete coverage on KPBS television, on KPBS FM, and online at kpbs.org/election. We will bring you all the results as they come in from across the county, the state, and the nation. For all of us here at KPBS, thanks for joining us. Good night.